everyone. My name is Misti Gaither, and welcome to Quest, a journey into true crime and the paranormal. I am beyond excited tonight. I have with me true crime author Diane Fanning. How you doing, Diane?
Doing terrific. Thank you, Misti.
Oh, you're very welcome. And before we start anything else, I just want to tell you happy birthday for tomorrow.
Thank you.
You are welcome. You have written at least 30 books on true crime, and then you have some mystery novels. And which one do you prepare for the most, or is it about the same when you're researching and everything?
It's harder if the crimes took place over a long period of time. So, like Through the Window, that was like 2 decades of crimes. And so that was rather difficult research. And others become easy because prosecutors are willing to share things. In cases where they're not, it gets very, very difficult because you have to go through back doors all over the place.
Let's talk about Through the Window because I believe that was one of your first books, if not
That
your
was my very
first.
first book.
Okay. And for those of you who do not know, that was about serial killer Tommy Lynn Sells. He was known as the Coast to Coast serial killer. It's just really amazing how I think that a girl from, that majored in chemistry in Lynchburg College, right? And
Yes,
now,
yes.
like one of the top true crime authors in the country and the world. And so I know the story, but do you mind telling my viewers, like, what led you in the direction to do true crime?
Well, it all started back when I was 9 years old. I was walking through my neighborhood with a friend, and the neighborhood was half rural and half suburban. So you'd have a cluster of houses, and then you'd have cows and corn. So we were going down a hill, and it was cows on one side, corn on the other. And this car came and stopped and asked for directions. So my girlfriend and I were trying to tell him where he wanted to go. And he said, "That's not making any sense to me. Can you come show it to me on my map?"
Wow.
So I walked up to his car. He threw the car door open. And instead of having a map, he was exposing himself. And he latched his hand onto my upper arm. And I was a scrawny little kid. And although I had a lot of fight in me, it didn't have a lot of weight behind it. And I was about to lose that battle when someone else came up over the hill, laid on their car horn, and the guy let go of me, took off, and drove off with his car door still hanging open. I was a big fan of watching the TV show Dragnet
Hmm.
and Sergeant Friday. I knew exactly what he wanted me to do, and that was memorize that license plate number. So I did. And when the police stopped him a couple of days later, they found evidence in the trunk of his car that he had sexually assaulted and murdered an 8-year old the month before. And that was something that really raised a couple of serious questions in my mind.
Hmm.
One, why me? Why was I picked to be a victim?
Right.
And number two, how could anybody possibly do that? I didn't understand that. So I started doing a lot of reading about criminal psychology, and some of it was way above my head, but I kept plodding through trying to understand it all. And it just stayed with me all my life. And then one night I was sitting and watching 48 Hours, and I saw little Crystal Searles.
Yes.
She was 10 years old, and she did what I did times 1,000, and she became my new hero. So I just had to write about her. I had to tell her story. And that's how I got the contract to write a book about Tommy Lynn Sells. He was her friend was his final victim.
Well, she basically helped solve the murder of her friend because she played dead, and even though she had her throat cut and everything, she still had the wherewithal, like you did, to play dead, but then to pay attention to what was going on and try to get like a description or something.
She was so good, so good. 10 years old. She's out in the middle of nowhere in West Texas. there's scorpions and rattlesnakes and cactus and tarantulas all around. And there she is at 4 a.m. walking to a neighbor to get help after she saw her friend murdered and had her own throat cuts to the point that she could not speak. Her vocal cords were severed. She also, unbeknownst at that moment, had been so close to death. She had the sheath that covered the outside of her carotid artery had been nicked. Just another millimeter, and she would have bled to death almost immediately. And she went and she went to a house a half mile away. They sent a helicopter to take her to San Antonio. She woke up, and when she woke up from surgery, she still couldn't speak, but she made the motion for pencil and paper.
Mhm.
And when she did that, she wrote, "Get the cops." And they did. And they brought a forensic artist. And although she couldn't use words, she was able to describe to the artist well enough that within an hour they knew who had committed that crime.
Now, Tommy Lynn Sells, I read something about, because you did a lot of research, and like you said, that was a 20-year crime spree
Mm-hmm.
killing that he was on. And I'm trying to remember exactly. It said either you was obsessed, kind of obsessed with him, or was he, because I know he wrote you. Was he the one that wrote
Yes.
you? And okay,
Yes.
all right. He,
I saw him in person a little over 20 times, and he wrote me lots of letters, and I wrote back to him too, trying to get information. And sometimes it was slow going to pull information out of him. And sometimes he just wanted to play games instead of
sure.
talking seriously. But I got as much from him as I could. And he said I was his best friend, which kind of gave me the willies and the creeps. After I finished the book, I kept in touch with him because I was the only one he would talk to.
Hmm.
And I was being contacted by private investigators, law enforcement, families who had murder victims that they were trying to find answers about. And so they were all sending me questions. And so I felt like I had to keep in touch with him because he wouldn't talk to anybody else. I was there with him for years, back and forth with letters and a few visits. And then finally he told me he could not talk to me anymore because his spiritual advisors told him that I was a bad influence. And so I got hold of someone in law enforcement I knew or I thought could find out. And apparently it became the big laugh among the Texas Rangers because his new spiritual advisors were Satanists. So it's
Wow.
probably a good thing that Satanists thought I was a bad influence.
Right, right. Now, he actually confessed to a murder that someone was convicted of to you.
Yes,
Okay, that was Julie Ray,
Ray.
right? And she had been in jail for a while because they thought that she killed her 10-year-old son Joel, and it actually was him. And she was just kind of like they just kind of threw her in there, and and she was trying to appeal, and then he confessed to you, and then because of you,
Yeah,
basically
it
is
was a
she got
very
yeah.
unusual situation because I didn't know anything about Julie Ray, having been convicted of killing her son and getting a sentence of 65 years until I was watching 2020 one night. And I saw her friends and her family and her lawyers all saying she's innocent and she's saying she's innocent. And I'm real skeptical about that because a lot of people who are guilty say they're innocent.
Right.
But then the prosecutor came on, and the prosecutor said some incredibly stupid things
Okay.
on that show. Like we found no stranger fingerprints in the house, and no one takes a weapon from a house and uses it to kill somebody. But
Okay.
I knew that Sells was very good at not leaving fingerprints at a scene. A state trooper up in Illinois told me that the place had never been uh, searched for fingerprints. And so that made the prosecutor a liar. The things that he said nobody does were things that Sells had done in other cases. So I tried to leverage that to get Sells to talk to somebody else other than me. He still wouldn't. He confessed to the crime to me, which he hadn't confessed to anyone else. And it ended up, I gave an affidavit. I did an affidavit with the someone from the state attorney general's office. They sent that up as part of the evidence packet for the defense, and of course they submitted it into court, and they were going to call me as a witness, but the prosecutor did not want me in the courtroom,
I
so he just
bet.
stipulated, which was fine with me.
Now, what I think is really badass, and not everybody can say this. I mean, we have, a lot of true crime authors and, but you actually were awarded by the Innocent Project, the Defender of the Innocent Award, which I think is just amazing.
That was definitely a high point in my life. It's really awesome when you can make such an incredible difference in someone's life, and when you can right an injustice. And it really was a wonderful moment. And probably the most thrilling part of it all was before I got the award, I was being introduced by Julie Ray to the audience of mostly lawyers and law students, and it was just I was very touched, very, very touched.
Now I'm looking over your shoulder and I'm seeing, you have some of your books up there and I'm seeing Bitter Remains and I don't have the best eyes. So I see Bitter Remains and I see Written in Blood, which I want to talk to you in just a few minutes about the Kathleen Michael Peterson story. Your books are, amazing. And then I'm thinking that when you're talking, you go like, well, when I was watching 2020 or when I was watching 48 Hours. And did you think at the time that you would actually be a consultant or an expert that 48 Hours, 2020, I mean, Oxygen,
Oh,
all
heck
these
no.
shows? I mean, I just think that is so cool that, I mean, you're talking like that would be like me, and because I'm such a true crime junkie. And so like if they called me to, to like, oh, what do you think about this case? And of course I'd be in heaven, but I wouldn't consider myself an expert. But like you are on, I mean, I just remember watching so many shows, and then Diane Fanning pops up and then you tell, how that you feel. And I just think that that's just so amazing, that's,
It was
part
a
of your
big
journey.
surprise to me too.
No, I mean and it's true. I mean, you have that. I mean, we talk about, you have a book, and I wanted to ask you too. You had wrote a book called Black Widow, and when I first saw the title, I was thinking about maybe it would be about Blanche Taylor Moore, but it was,
Uh-huh.
but about Betty New. I believe that's Newmar, and
Yeah.
I mean, you have that one, and then you have one that I think that is a lot of people that may remember the story or read is the book's called Out There, and it's a love triangle of the astronauts. And so you have Lisa Nowak. She traveled 900 miles, and I remember this story from way. It's been a while in a diaper.
But
900,
you
yeah,
know, Misty,
yeah,
the diaper, that was the biggest joke point that everybody took advantage of.
right,
But the fact of the matter is that that was the most logical thing she did.
okay,
She was a trained astronaut. She knew how to properly prepare for a mission. And that's what astronauts do when they go up into space. So she had her own little personal mission. And so naturally she'd wear a diaper.
right, and drink Tang. I guess. I don't
Yes.
I don't know. But I just, I remember that story and and then you also have The Pastor's Wife about Mary and Matthew Winkler, which I really think that the religious aspect and stuff. I think that was one of the things that kind of drew me to the story of Mary Winkler, and how, was that really true of what happened to her, about how that she was sexually abused, or verbally abused, like by Matthew. And then he was a youth pastor or a pastor of the church, and then he came from a long line of pastors. And then you have Mary that, says these things, but was that ever really proven that happened?
No, it was not. No, it was not. And that was a bit disturbing to me because Matthew was dead and, of course, couldn't defend himself at all.
Right.
Now, personally, I thought he was pretty crappy husband, but he was definitely of the man is in charge school of thought that dominates the Church of Christ congregations. Not the United Church of Christ. They're different species altogether, but the regular Church of Christ.
Right.
This is what they believe. In some churches of Christ, they take it so literally that a woman cannot be in charge of the church nursery. Now, that's about the craziest thing I ever heard. He was a little cruel in the way that he talked to her and how he made her feel bad. But I do not think that any of the other abuse that came up at trial actually happened. When she was first arrested, her father was saying, I had no idea that anything like this was going on in her house. I thought they had a wonderful marriage. And then a little ways down the road, it was, well, I talked to Mary and I told her if she was an abused wife, she needed to come out, and she denied it, and I believed her. And then even further down the road, he says, oh, I begged her and begged her and begged her to leave her husband. Well, which is it? He changes his story as the defense is getting its pieces together and to follow along with his story. And that shoe and that wig.
I was about to bring up the shoe. That was like what you would call a textbook back then, prostitute shoe, I guess.
So,
I mean, it was,
she held up that shoe in the courtroom.
Right.
And she was asked, is that your shoe? And she said, no, it's like my shoe. It was not her shoe. It was never in her house. Lord knows where they found that thing and why they didn't have a pair, but they didn't. And then look at that wig. Now, if somebody wants to have little sexual fantasies and have their wife or husband wear a wig or look different in some way or another, that's fine. That's all consenting adult stuff.
Sure.
Fine. But they're going to get you to wear a wig that does not look like your hair, because that's the point. But that looked exactly like the hair on her head. That wasn't a fantasy wig,
Right.
It wasn't something she had to dress up to look different. It was just, it made no sense.
And I totally agree with that. And then you have to think, well, she was able to successfully get her children back after she did her time, or they released her. And, his family, fought for custody, of course, but she was able to regain custody of their 3 girls.
And that bothered me a little bit. I mean, I think she got away with murder. And I think the reason she did is because of her attorney, Steve Faris. I sat in that courtroom and I watched Steve Faris perform his magic. And when he is talking, you can't help but to believe everything is sincere and true, because he has that Baptist minister fire in him.
Okay.
And he talks a very good game. And it wasn't like once he'd stop talking, I'd go, wait a minute. Everything he said wasn't exactly accurate. So, but at the time, you just have to believe him because he's got that charisma. And I think he's the reason she got off of murder, got away with murder. And I think that the whole situation was fraught with a lot of emotional things between her and the family. And she got custody basically because the family gave the custody up.
Okay.
And I worried about those girls for a while because I know 3 little girls can be aggravating sometimes. But when those 3 little girls become 3 little teenage girls, That's the age where they press their parents' buttons.
Yes, they
And
do.
I was so worried they would become teenagers, and one of them was bound to push a button.
Hmm.
And how would Mary react? That worried me.
Let's talk about the Written in Blood, Kathleen and Michael Peterson story.
Yes.
Now, for those of you who do not know, Michael Peterson was an author, a best-selling New York Times bestseller author, I believe, and his wife Kathleen, they found her at the bottom of the stairs, and the crime scene looked kind of shaky with blood everywhere, not really what you would see if someone just fell down the stairs. Well, not only, they also found that when they were in Germany, I think before he even met Kathleen, the neighbor, Elizabeth Ratliff, she died the same, almost the same exact way as his wife did. She was found at the
Yes.
end of the stairs. And then he inherited money from her and her two daughters.
Well, he inherited the control of
Mm-hmm.
the money
Right.
because he had the two daughters, and he got money from the army for those two daughters because they were orphans and their mother had been working as a teacher in a U.S. school near the army base, and their father had been active duty army. So they were entitled to death benefits and protection as the children of slain military workers.
Now, if you look at the autopsy photos of Kathleen's head, and they have the distinct, like, different marks, because they were saying that they believe that he hit her in the head with, like,
They could fire poke, and it could have
yeah,
been that.
right.
It could have been something else,
They
but
never found it. Did you hear of the owl theory?
oh, that is such a goofy thing.
I
That
know.
was all developed by this guy who just desperately wanted Michael Peterson to be innocent.
Hmm.
And so he made a big deal out of this thing. Yeah, there were owl feathers found at the scene, a couple of them. But come on, that's where the owls were flying around that house all the time. And feathers are like hair. They travel on other people's bodies. They go just all sorts of places, and they can't be predicted where when they got to the place they rested, or how long they'd been there. In that tight space,
Right.
I cannot see an owl with that huge wingspan it has. I can't see it getting into that tight back stairs. This was not the big, pretty front stairway. This was the tight back stairs originally made for the servants in the house. And I just don't think it's just not conceivable. And plus, when you look at one of the defense witnesses, I know the prosecution witness with the blood evidence, his he was called into question and everything, but the witness for the defense said that yes, there was there was impact at a point above the stairs and away from the wall,
Right.
basically in midair. And you can't get a midair hit by falling down the stairs.
Yeah, I remember when I first heard of that theory, I was like, wow. I mean, because some people will try to come up with anything to make
Yeah.
their narrative. Now, let me ask you, because I know, like, I watch a lot of true crime, a lot. I'm on the case, I'm right with y'all, bobbing and weaving and trying to figure out stuff, and but sometimes it's like real easy to kind of get down like in the rabbit hole, and like true crime, true crime, true crime, true crime, and then I just have to kind of take a break and just kind of like rest my mind from it, from a little bit. Now, do you have hobbies, or what do you do to kind of take a break, or do you just roll with it 24/7?
That's why I started writing fiction too,
Mhm.
because I didn't have to look at crime scene photos. I didn't have to look at autopsy reports. I didn't have to listen to real people crying from real pain.
Mhm.
And I could kill whoever I wanted to.
So true. You're like, today's your day.
Yes.
Now, what kind of books do you like to read?
Right now, I'm reading a book of one of the Chuck O'Connor books, and No, wait a minute. What's his name? Oh, Cochran O'Connor. And that's like a detective kind of thing. He was sheriff and then he wasn't sheriff, but he's still solving crimes. And then I'm also reading Prequel, which is Rachel Maddow's latest book.
Okay.
So I'm kind of all over the place. I usually have a fiction and a nonfiction going at the same time.
Yeah. So, what case is there, like a recent case that you're thinking about maybe doing a book on, or what case that just kind of I just find myself, I don't know if the word's obsessed, but I just like read up a lot on it or watch a lot. The Tony Hinthorn case.
And I'm not familiar with that one.
That's the one, Harold Hinthorn, and it was in Estes Park, and they went hiking, and she fell allegedly off the cliff, and then they found out his first wife got murdered too, and then her. And you really need to check. It's Tony and Harold Hinthorn, and it's really
Okay.
good. It's a really good case, and I just find myself just I don't know, just always anything on it. I'm there, for it, and I don't know why.
Did you hear the news today that a 28-year-old crime has finally been solved? It happened up in the Blue Ridge Mountains on the Parkway. And someone I wrote about, Richard Mark Ivanitz, was at one time suspected of maybe being the killer of Lolly and Julianne. And then that didn't pan out. And then they had somebody else they were looking at, and that didn't pan out. And the poor parents have been waiting for 28 years to get an answer to what happened to the two girls. They just made a DNA match
Wow.
to a guy who's currently in prison after 28 years. It's hard to believe.
It is, and you think about how the genealogy, and it really started getting popular with the Golden State Killer arrest, and it is just
Yeah.
snowballed. Parabon and all the labs and CC Moore, and just it's such a amazing tool. I mean, do you find like you've been like on the Tommy Lynn Sells case? I mean, that was 20 years. And then some of these
Yeah.
cases getting solved, like you said, 28, 30 years, 40 years, and they're finding their killers.
Mhm.
Has that changed any of the narrative, like in when you're researching a case now? Because there's that hope, or
Well, the thing of it is like if you go back to a certain point, like all of Sell's earlier crimes, nobody was collecting evidence for the purpose of saving DNA because it's got to be preserved properly. Often it isn't. It wasn't back then. Now I think they do a much better job of that, of something that might possibly prove beneficial in the future. But back then, I mean, they had fingerprints, but they didn't have DNA at all.
right?
And they just didn't have that tool available. A criminal can easily keep their fingerprints out of a crime scene if they think ahead and want to. But there's no way they can prevent not shedding a little bit of DNA. They can be found on the victim, can be found in the victim's surroundings. Um, because DNA, I mean, we use loose skin cells all the time,
Sure.
and they have DNA. It might be hard to find, but it's going to be there somewhere. But you have to have the scene preserved or the evidence preserved in a way that you can use that in the future.
So, the Black Widows, and we have a lot of Black Widows. Like I was saying, you wrote the one about Betty Newmar, and, we have her. We have, what is that, Marie Tilly.
And then there's Raynella Dossett Leith.
Yes, and you wrote a book about that too. Is that what was the
Yes.
name of that one? That was not The Bitter
Her Deadly
Remains?
Web.
Her Daily Web, that's it. And it's just amazing how the pattern of, like Betty Newmar, she was married 5 different times. They all
Yeah.
died. Her son died. And it's like, didn't people
And who
start
got the
thinking,
insurance? Oh,
Betty,
wow.
right? No one, like, put it together, like maybe at the third one, and kind of say, but they were probably, back then there was probably, well, poor Betty, and she was,
Yeah, it was amazing that she got away with it for so long. And there were people that suspected her, but finding the evidence was difficult. And part of that was there had been a flood down in the Keys where one of her victims was, and everything that was gathered about her had been destroyed in the flood. It made it difficult to nail her down. And then she went up and died before they could do it. So
Right. Yeah. So, yeah, you're right.
how
Because,
rude.
yeah, she didn't even get to, got away with it. Well, in this life, I should say she got away with it. But
Yes.
I don't think you answered my question about, like, are you working on any new, like new
Oh,
books
well,
or
anything new?
anything? Yeah.
Now I haven't found it. See, I've got a couple of criteria for when a story strikes my fancy.
Hmm.
The last one that did, I wasn't as quick on the draw, and someone else got the book. I like to find a case where I there's something new I can learn about a crime, a crime I'm not kind of crime I'm not familiar with. Like, for example, in Bitter Remains.
Okay.
I had never written a book about dismemberment before. So that was just, I wanted to learn about that. And I also need to find something is fascinating to me about the victims or the perpetrator that draws me into the story. Like, for example, with Written in Blood and Gone Forever, they were two women who were professional women. They had impeccable reputations. They were well loved by family and friends. And yet somehow they both became victims in their own homes. And they shouldn't have been.
Right.
They didn't do anything to bring about their own death except marry the wrong man.
I have thoroughly enjoyed speaking with you this evening. I wanted to leave you with a quote that you had, and this comes from Mommy's Little Girl, the book you wrote about Kaylee Anthony, which is, y'all all probably know about that case, is it just, for years, and sometimes it'll pop up, the case
Hmm.
will pop up, and it was a sad thing, but it was a quote. It says, "Love never gives up, never loses faith, and is always hopeful and endures every circumstance." And that's the hope, with all
Yeah.
these cases that are sad and really, it bothers us or, makes us think and appreciate our life. And love is what is the beacon, it's the hope.
And, when I write these true crime books, Missy, I am really more interested in the people that have been affected and the community that's been affected than I am in the crime itself. The personal impact to people and communities is horrific. And if I can just have one person tell me thank you
Right.
for representing my friend or showing my mother for who she was, anything like that makes me feel like I've fulfilled my purpose.
And I think you have, from 9 years old. You're that little girl that could be a terrible, you know, situation. And
And
you
I
took
turned out to
that,
be very, very lucky.
yeah, blessed, yes. So I do appreciate, so much that, being a guest here on the show. I hope you'll join us again, and like to talk to you, some more about some more of your books. And it was just such an honor to meet you. Thank you.